Hi, Glenys.
Hey, Aaron. What do you want to talk about today?
How much I hate diets.
Yeah, diets suck.
So what do you do instead of a diet?
Intuitive eating. Health at every size.
So how many times have you had to explain intuitive eating and health at every size to someone?
Like 5,000 times. But that was just to my doctor.
Okay, so how many times have you explained it to someone and then they said, but diets are the only thing I know?
That's like every time. Can we pursue health without thinking about weight?
Yes, we can pursue health without thinking about weight.
That's pretty revolutionary, what you just said. But what if you just don't like yourself at the size that you're at?
I think we need to understand why, instead of just saying I need to change.
So, what's the deal with body positivity?
Oh man, that's a long answer. I'm Aaron Flores.
And I'm Glenys Oyston. And we are Dietitians Unplugged.
Hey everybody, welcome back for another episode of Dietitians Unplugged. How are you, Glenys?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing awesome. I'm really excited to be talking to you. You know, we're sort of doing a few less episodes, right? But so we're not talking as often. But like, so I get a little like Glenys jonesing, right? I'm like, when am I going to do another episode of Glenys? So I'm excited to be talking to you.
Yeah, that's why I try to send you texts once in a while.
There you go. I appreciate
like
those
annoying
texts.
texts.
Hey, I'm over here.
What's the meaning of life, Aaron?
42.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that's right. Oh, I forgot we already
knew that. If you don't know
that.
that reference, Google it, and you're going to appreciate the story for that. Nerds.
Yeah, but you're also not going to want to read any of those books. So
oh, come
anyway.
on now. Jeez.
Like me.
Oh, here we are again.
You can know things without reading. Anyway, well, we are super excited to have Jessica Wilson on today as our guest. And I love this conversation because, like, I love stuff that challenges what we know and think. But also, I think this episode is going to answer, like, questions that a lot of our clients or potential clients or people who listen to us will have probably had, like around health at every size and intuitive eating, because we lean on those things a lot in our conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those two things probably form the backbone of our philosophy and probably the way we practice. Jessica came to my attention. Like, it was so interesting. Like, one person I knew said, oh, do you know Jessica Wilson? She has some interesting thoughts on intuitive eating. And we talked to them. And then the next week, somebody else brought her name up. And I was like, this is a sign from the universe. She has to come on our podcast and talk about this. So I asked her and she said yes. And so she's going to be here with us today. And I'm super excited for this conversation.
Yeah. And Jessica's someone that I had met at some previous conferences and reconnected with her when I was speaking in Sacramento. I was so excited that she was there and we got to say hello. I think she's got some very like brilliant thoughts and I really enjoy this conversation with her. And she's just like a real asset to our community. So I'm really thankful that you thought of her and that this happened. I think people are really going to enjoy this conversation, including all the professionals who listen as well. I think this is going to give you some good stuff to think about for sure.
Yeah. So let me just read about Jessica. Jessica Wilson is a registered dietitian working in private practice and with the college population. In private practice, she works with clients to learn to eat without having a roadmap for their choices, and instead to learn to become fun and flexible in their eating habits. In her consultation, she drives progress and advancement in the eating disorder field by fostering curiosity, building capacity for change, and inviting constructive challenge. She centers and elevates the narratives and lived experiences of individuals with marginalized identities and honors that our bodies and our histories inform how each of us show up and share space. And we talked a lot about that in the conversation today. So I think just, people are going to really appreciate that conversation.
Absolutely. So short intro, because you know what? We just got to get right to this conversation. So everyone, please enjoy our interview with Jessica Wilson. Hey, Jessica, thanks so much for hopping on the podcast with us today.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to talk to you both.
We met a few years ago back at a conference, and all of our works has evolved a lot since then and continues to progress. Tell us a little bit about like the work you're doing now, and how you came to this work in the first place, right? As a dietitian, and what informs you as you do this work.
Sure. I'll start by saying or giving some identifying markers since, this is audio. So
Yeah.
I'm a Black dietitian, of which, we make up 2% of the whole dietetic and dietitian fields. So I think that's always important for framing. I'm also a thin dietitian. I'm queer, married to a woman, but depending on where you are and who you are, I have passing privilege, straight passing privilege. So I think those are more of my salient identities. And also I do identify as someone with a chronic illness. I have seizure disorders. So that really impacts access to things and how I'm able or have to move my body. So those things I think will become more important as I start going through and talking about what I think has worked and not worked. So we'll start there and then I can talk to you about how I got here.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm really excited. I just decided to start doing consulting in addition to my private practice. I went to a conference, got to speak at a conference in November, and there was a lot of things that I discussed there with another colleague, and afterwards met some great dietitians who were really interested in the field of eating disorders and seeing where it could go. Because right now we probably don't need to discuss that it's not the most inclusive field as is, and historically has been pretty harmful for folks who weren't, thin white women with eating disorders. So I think there's opportunities to create new narratives in the field, and I'm very excited about that. And then more specifically in my practice, in 2009, I started working at student health in Oregon at a health center. And as you can imagine, I wanted to work with people who ate food, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I got into this, to talk about eating food and all the ways you can eat food. And instead I got a lot of people who weren't eating food and who didn't want to be eating food. And I was stuck. I was like, this is not what I signed up for. I don't know how to do this, which is not uncommon, I'm sure, for a lot of dietitians.
Yeah, it's funny when you said that, it was really resonated just now. And I was like, oh my God, I remember thinking when I was first wanted to become a dietitian, I was like, I'm so excited to work with people who eat food, even though by and large I was restricting at the time. But I was like, I didn't expect the work that actually was there and needed to be done, but people not wanting to eat food. So that's the way you put it was like, oh yeah, that's exactly how I felt.
Yeah. And then I think, Aaron, also I heard you say, along with eating disorders, there's a lot of trauma that overlaps. And I think you said that dietitians learn 0 + 0 × 0 about trauma. So all of those things were things I was not prepared to hold and to work with. So that was a steep learning curve. But thankfully, I was at a student health center that really was interested in teaching and, growth and sending me to conferences. One of my first eating disorder patients was somebody who was not thin, and also their partner had an eating disorder. They were both not thin. And, per the math that we are taught when we're dietitianing, right? People who starve are very thin, right? Because calories in, calories out, of course. And so I just did not know what to do with any of my training at that point. I was like, everything is a lie. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going, this is awful. So I think it may have been my clients and me and some other folks who were, started looking to health at every size, which then helped things make sense. And I was then looking to talk about it with more people. Surprisingly, in 2012, I ended up at the Run Fruit conference at which Dr. Deb Burgard was the keynote speaker. So that's really all I needed.
Awesome.
Yeah. So she did her thing. And I remember camping out in the line of people after she spoke, at the end of the line so that nobody would be after me and want to start talking while I was still there, and totally did a fangirl intervention. And I was like, hi, let's be friends. I would love to be your friend. And indeed, we have been friends since then. So it was a good introduction to health at every size.
It's sort of like saying, like, I'm going to go to Woodstock and I hope I get to hear some music. And then, like, all of a sudden you see Jimi Hendrix and you're like, oh.
And we should be friends.
Everything's changed. Yeah, and then you become friends with Jimi Hendrix.
The rest is history. Absolutely.
The rest is history.
Yeah. Quick question, before you had met Deb and sort of found out about this, were you sort of in a diet paradigm way of thinking with just because we're trained that way? Was that sort of, you mentioned the calories in, calories out, was that something you sort of subscribed to initially?
I got into student health very quickly after graduating. And let's see. So during grad school, actually, I failed at all of my rotations. Okay, not failed, but I hated them because it was calories in, calories out. And who needed a calculator? It was awful. So I wouldn't say, believed it at the time. I also, was very heavily trained in it. I did go on a rotation. Right. And I think, Glenys, I heard you say, something that we learned is like, there's 3,500, calories in a pound. So it was like, if you cut back on 100 every day over 35 days, you can lose a pound type stuff. Yeah.
Right.
So that was not my thing. So yes, I was steeped in like diet culture and calories in, but then I quickly actually worked with athletes, and the focus was like eating all of the calories you can ever. So I didn't work so very long in diety environments. So that was pretty lucky.
And it sounds like actually you almost like were resistant to it initially, which is such an amazing instinct, right? Like that you're just like,
right. Math. It was literally the math and quantifying people's experiences. And I was like, that's not what I can do as a human. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like your initial instincts were like, diets are bullshit and like, this is not fun.
Yeah, I also just didn't understand them from a math perspective, right?
Right. Well, and that's because they're not understandable. Right? Like, they don't work. So that is...
Because it's not math.
It's like you were...
Right.
Our bodies are not bomb calorimeters. So... and like little math calculators. So on your website, you identify as being a health at every size informed provider, but not a health at every size provider. And you've obviously like worked in the health at every size sort of world. But can you tell us like a little bit about what the difference is there for you and what that means?
Sure. And feel free to have me pause or interrupt along the way, because it's been, a journey to get there. So after meeting Deb in 2012, I was very over Oregon. I'm in California right now in Sacramento, but had been born and raised here. And the sun doesn't shine in Oregon, so I was kind of over it. And Deb is in the Bay Area, and a lot of health at every size, think tank stuff was happening there. So I packed up me and my spouse and my dog, and we moved to Oakland. So that I could do more private practice and be more around health at every size folks. And that was a great thing, which became a very hard thing. The majority of the health at every size focused people in the Bay Area were older, middle-aged white women, and really wanted to focus on just body size, right? Like, health at every size was kind of like the ticket to all of the privilege. Like being a white affluent woman, if I'm only policed for my size, health at every size will indeed prove that I'm worthy of all of this privilege. Does that make sense?
It sounds like what you're saying is it really wasn't including any of the sort of intersections beyond. There was no intersection with, it was just like...
Right.
Body size. The focus was just on body size, and that it was missing all of the other intersections that affect one's life and level of privilege.
Sure, I would go to the meetings and be the only person of color there and say, "Oh, is this historical?" It'd be like, "Oh no, so and so was here, for like a few months, and then they stopped coming." Oh, and so came, a few months ago. Oh, do they come back? No. right? And I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. Maybe I can, help this conversation and talk about intersectionality. And every time I would say something about, hey, what about, being a fat Black person going to the doctor's office? It'd be like, well, Jessica, actually, no, that's not what we're talking about here. So it was either interruption or dismissal or like silence, right? Like, we've not thought about that. We don't want to think about it. Let's not think about it. Let's move on. So it was really hard.
Yeah, because I'm wondering if like you bringing up those questions has like really brought it forward to some degree as well. So, because I know that people talk a bit more about that at least in the wider world. I'm not directly involved with ASDA, but it sounds like those conversations are starting to be had more. And you may have been influential.
Yes, I definitely credit Deb for that one. I definitely credit Deb for listening, right? Yes. So she did listen. And indeed, I helped revise the Health at Every Size principles. I think it was 2015. There used to be 4. It was explicitly, like intuitive eating was one of them. I can't remember what the physical activity one used to be, but I had brought up a lot of like inherent classism with the principles like intuitive eating, because if I want a salad but can only afford ramen, like what is this type concerns? And so the language, we also like put social justice in the bigger descriptions. And I will hear a lot of people like tell me today, oh, no, Health at Every Size is inclusive. It says social justice in there. And I say, I helped put it there and therefore I know it's there. But sometimes the field is still lacking when it comes to discussions.
I think the way I would think about that too is like it's different putting it on the website versus actually doing it, right? There's a level of doing it that is really important that moves past just putting it on your webpage or putting it on on a written document, right? I mean, there's a lot of like actual physical work that needs to happen when we do that.
Right. And like growth, not just,
right.
Yeah. And willingness. And so like I've done that before. And I think I did it after, like put language in something with the intention that it would then become that thing.
Right.
And then like, oh, that's not how one makes change. Right.
Is part of that also about like that once it's on the page that there's nothing formally like established to make that happen?
The action has been taken. Right.
Yeah.
Well, right. And it's also done, therefore it is. It's on the page.
And so like I'm trying to think of like my own timeline as you share this and thinking about like as I learned about Health at Every Size and I vaguely remember when I feel like such a newbie that like I only remember these current principles. I don't remember the previous 4, and so it's interesting because I'm when I'm thinking about like as I learned about Health at Every Size and sort of got more immersed in the movement or culture, I don't know, however we want to phrase it. It's interesting because I feel like that social justice language has grown, but to also understand, like I think it's really important context for me and for everyone to know that like, even just a few years ago, like that wasn't there, and it was there's so much work and labor that was done by people like yourself, right? Mm-hmm. That most people don't even really maybe even know about now. Mm-hmm. But like that labor is super important.
Speaking of labor, so how I got to not be a Health at Every Size provider. So with the Health at Every Size like experience that I was having, not having Black and brown folks at the table, not having, trans folks, gender nonconforming folks at the table, I was wondering, of course, why. And does Health at Every Size even resonate with folks who are not at this table? Right. So those are the questions that I started to ask. And so I formed a group in the Bay Area called Hazed and Confused, right? As one does.
Great name.
Yes, when you want to know. Yeah, thank you. So that was the group. And I really wanted to ask the group, like, what are you hearing? What are you seeing in health at every size and in the movement? And, for Black and brown as well as white folks at the table, it was like it's overwhelmingly white. It's overwhelmingly middle-aged then, right? So this was still years ago. Around and during these conversations at Hazed and Confused, it was the overwhelming thought that, fat white women or men who go to the doctor and have, completely normal labs and, don't have diabetes, don't have heart disease, and are exercising well and are eating, the things that they get at Whole Foods or whatever it is. Health at every size would be very important because they could, show that they're exercising and eating intuitively. Therefore, you can't, fault them or can't say that they are unhealthy. But somebody who is, fat, queer, and Black or brown, when they go to the doctor's office, regardless, whether or not they're bringing their health at every size approved behaviors, they're still not going to be treated well, not going to be treated with respect. And it seemed like in health at every size, the conversation just ended at size, right? It was about white people. It was about size. It was very clear. And some people at the table were really pointing out how much health at every size relied on whiteness to advance and go forward in the field, right? Because if it had been Black and brown people, it could have been a different narrative.
So my question is, as you describe that person going to the doctor, is there, and just to sort of get it through my head, is part of that what you're talking about is just the inherent racism and oppression that shows up in all systems in this country, because we're a country built on racism, that those things aren't being addressed as well. It's
right.
Just size.
So it was just size at the time that all of these conversations were happening. And historically, Black and brown people, for many different reasons, have been treated horribly by the medical industrial complex. And so all of that was showing up in the room as well. I can't just bring in my lab results and then feel automatically comfortable or treated well, or both, right? Yeah.
Right.
So indeed, it was like a singular issue conversation.
And is that sort of what your break as saying you're not a Hays provider, is that sort of where you came to that, or what did that end up looking like in your work and your world?
The folks who I was most interested in supporting and helping didn't see themselves in the health at every size movement for the reasons that we've discussed here. For some of the voices that were very strong and dominant in health at every size from the the movement and intuitive eating portion of it, because it was very class based, right? Joyful movement, can come to folks who have access to places to be, moving their bodies joyfully. Eating intuitively makes sense when you can eat, have money to eat whatever you want to eat, type of stuff. I've said a few times or many times, my white clients will come in and be like, I want to eat intuitively and, health at every size. My Black and brown clients do not come in with that to me, right? So it just didn't resonate. And also it was very research heavy. That when we look at the research, bodies are okay to be the way they are. When we're relying on, the data to show us that people are worthy, I just don't do that. And then the inherent, healthism that is required for health at every size to, stand on its own. We are focusing on health just generally rather than behaviors and experiences in people and all of the things that I, work with people about.
Right. Okay.
So when you're talking about the research and being so research driven, one of the things that comes to mind is how everyone tries to be very quote unquote evidence based, and realizing that there's a flaw in that thinking. Is that what you're sort of alluding to on some level? And that again, research is based on systems that are inherently exclusionary of a lot of people of color and lower socioeconomic status.
It's all of that, sure. And also then how we lean so much on research that is, indeed inherently flawed, but also we don't talk about experiences, right? So people are left out of the research, and we're not so much interested in like lived experiences because we hold up data and evidence, so much higher than individuals.
So I want to draw a couple things together of things you already have mentioned, and I'm sure we'll keep continuing to come up as we talk. Is, if we're speaking, let's just focus on us being dietitians for a second, and so much of what we're trained to do is rely heavily on that lean on evidence-based, right? Lean on, this is the calculation, here's the number, right? Here is your like protocol, if this, then this. And we're not taught to sit with experiences, right? We're not taught to sit with the individual that shows up in the room or their trauma, right? Or that like, hey, this system or this evidence-based model might not work for them. So then what do you do?
And medical establishment generally, like it's a lot of math. It's so many numbers. So if you have like us who are integrated into like a medical model, it just literally doesn't add up sometimes for us to be like wanting to be with humans and experiences rather than numbers.
So I presume, and I just want to clarify for our listeners, like you, even though you sort of have not drifted, that's the wrong word. Even though you have sort of, even though you're sort of like feeling apart from health at every size, it doesn't sound like you've gone back to a weight normative approach in any way.
No.
So it sounds like what you're trying to build is something like beyond HAES. Essentially, and extending, maybe even if it's possible to extend that reach so that it can be more inclusive of people's.
And not labeling it as a thing, right? Because we always run into like that principles are registered trademark was also a thing that came up for people. It's like, what is this program? Like it's got a trademark.
Right.
Rather than, yes. So indeed, like what can a conversation look like that is not health at every size? How can it indeed be more inclusive? Like, how can it resonate with more people? How can it draw more people in who don't have like the internet resources to have looked up health at every size or intuitive eating or whatever it is?
And also you've talked about now you don't really use the intuitive eating model. Like you said, people don't come in and ask for that. And I agree, like many of my clients also don't come in and say, I want to be an intuitive eater. I think some do, some don't. But, it depends on I think where they are and trying to escape the pain that they're in with the diet approach. But, and I appreciate that. I think there are many different non-diet eating models out there too. And also sometimes we're just, I don't know about you, but like I'm making it up as I go sometimes. Like, using that sort of intuition as a dietitian and working with somebody's experience. But how does the work that you do with clients differ from something like intuitive eating or even from the HAES philosophy? Like what might be sort of a difference in that work?
So I think with health at every size, if I don't bring like health at every size, the term and the research, and try and prove to somebody that their existence is valuable regardless of what the data says, I think it's a completely different conversation, right? They can learn differently when they're not focused on it's okay to be me because the data says so. Like it's okay to be me and have my experience and, recover from diet culture because I am me and I'm great, right? Not because the data says I'm going to be fine. So it's a different conversation. It leaves room and space for a different conversation to be had there.
Do you find you're taking the emphasis off of health or are people relieved by the idea of that? Or like, what is that conversation around health? Or do people come in, worried about health? And what does that look like?
Right. A few things. So one, I'll start with, sometimes I'll use myself. I mentioned at the beginning, that I have a seizure disorder, right? And I'll, bring that in and be like, I will never be healthy, right? Like, so me striving to have like perfect everything is going to be a waste of my time. I'm going to miss so much if I'm like trying the keto diet for my seizure disorder. Doesn't work, right? Or I'm going to try and do like every acupuncture, yoga, whatever. Like I'm just not going to be a healthy person. I could waste all of my years, trying to be. And so with folks too, I will talk about like, even if there was some way to have like magical health markers, do you want to be living your life? Like, what makes a good life? Is it longevity? Is it like being free and clear of every illness ever? Or like, who do you want to be present for? What are your values? What do you want to be doing?
Yeah,
Yes.
I love that because I feel like that's the conversation I'm trying to have more often because people come in like super focused on health.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what does that even mean for you? And, they'll often say like, I have this, I've just been diagnosed with diabetes or hypertension. I don't want to be on medication. And I'm like, well, what's the problem with being on medication if that allows you to have a good life? Like, and I find people starting to relax a little bit around this idea that they're, to be healthy, they have to not be on medication.
Yeah.
Or they have to be, like you said, have perfect numbers. Like, you know what? I don't have perfect labs, but I'm doing what I can to have a good life. And I love how you said, what does it mean to have a good life? Is it really longevity? People get so focused on that. I'm going to make it to 100. I'm like, listen, I've worked with people who are over 100 and that is not the glamorous life you think it is. Like, what does today look like for you? What could tomorrow look like? But why do we have to think about 30 years from now kind of thing? So I love that you're, kind of challenging that with people.
And again, a conversation that as dietitians, we were never trained to have,
We're supposed to fix the lipids, fix the blood sugar.
Fix it, right? No, I mean, exactly. Like that we're trained to sort of like reinforce this healthism idea that yes, you're right. Your lipids are out of control and you must be wrong as a person. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the inherent subtle message or unsubtle message that gets delivered to our clients. So again, what I love is that you brought up healthism and this idea that like, to be worthy of humanity is very separate from your health, right? We are born inherently worthy of all of these things. And when we tie health to it, it's so, I mean, that is like, I don't know, it's such a fucked up, like exclusionary rule that most people are not really like sort of thinking about that is very exclusionary. They're like, oh yeah, no, I'm shitty because my lipids are high, So I as you're sort of describing how you move away from these things, the labels, right? Let's just talk about the labels, right? It's just sort of like, what I'm hearing so much in what you're talking about is I'm going to see the person in the room. I'm going to see the person in the room and all of the things that they show up with.
Yeah.
All of the things that I bring to this work. Right. And I'm going to create a relationship with them in a way where we get to talk about all of the things that affect their humanity, their health, all of these things. And I'm going to do it from a space that just is sort of about seeing them and being with them rather than I have to fix them. Right.
Because that's a big job and definitely not something I will ever be able to do.
Right.
Yes.
Right. I always have to remind myself like, I'm not here to fix the person. I'm not here to fix because that is my go-to.
Problem solver. I'm recovering.
Problem solver, helper. Yeah. Oh my God. And then when I remind myself of that, I relax so much. And then I feel like that changes the interaction with the client. And it's like,
gotten feedback.
Not fixing them.
From my clients, they can tell what they get. Let's see. With me, they know what they're going to get, which, Yeah. So they know that I'm not going to, that I'm going to be working off the cuff, we'll say. I tell people, I have visible tattoos. I had a quote on my Instagram from a client, used with permission. I said, oh, so because we'd been talking about how she had was the largest person in eating disorder treatment at the centers she was going to and in groups. And I said, have you talked to your therapist about that? And she said, no. And I was like, oh, how come? She said, have you met my therapist? I was like, no, but I've talked to her on the phone. And the client said, well, she's very thin and very well put together. And I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what I did not say in my head was, oh, I'm not very well put together. No, I'm joking. I don't. Also I'm not. And that's fine and good. Right. But still, like what we bring, you mentioned sitting in the room, and I'm pretty intentional about what I bring to a room. Of course, what's up in our room, people, comment on creating space, but also like me and what, like my expressions, the stuff I bring, hopefully communicate that I am an actual person who has actual like experiences in this world. I'm not like a clinician who does, follows the book.
Yeah, no dietitian bot. That's what I find is so great about doing private practice is like, I've just decided I'm showing up as me and am a little bit messy. So but I think there's some human connection there when you can show up and being real instead of like your client who's now intimidated by saying something about this because there's just a level of professionalism somehow that's creating a barrier in a way.
I think also when it comes to like labels, like you said, and how I don't use labels as much, intuitive eating was definitely something that I was like 100% all in for. And I made the mistake of reading the first edition. And I don't know if you all have, it's very... Yeah. It's not very weight focused, but it was like, hey, this is a new and better way to diet. Like if you do all these things, you will, lose weight. And I think, again, from a starting place, kind of like how Health at Every Size started from very researchy, very white, space. When it's not built or not centered around like either everyone or those who are most marginalized, it's inherently like not great enough for me. It's not great enough for my clients, right? It's not great enough for the people who I really am most, who I most value and really want to work with, right? And something that's based on weight loss, like there's only, so much we can do to make, Weight Watchers into a lifestyle modification. Remember they're, pitching it as this, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
No. I understand.
No, they still are.
Yeah, right. A lifestyle change and then like more mindful. They have mindful eating in Weight Watchers now. Anyhow, definitely not saying intuitive eating at all is like Weight Watchers. I think though you can understand what I am saying when something starts from a harmful place, there's only so much we can change to it, like so that it like stays what like the 10 principles, right? If the 10 principles originally were for weight loss, like what are these 10 principles now? And for me, I look at them and indeed it does provide that same safety that diet culture provides, right? It's things that I can do, right? That gives me safety. And so I know I'm eating the right way, right? It creates this in-group and out-group. Like, look at these things. As long as I'm doing these 10 things,
right,
I'm doing it the right way and I feel okay about the way that I'm eating.
Yeah, you're feeling like it's a bit of a checkbox model.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I can eat that cake because I've made peace with food and I'm discovering the satisfaction factor. Not because I was looking at it and it was fine.
And I think the initial... definitely the initial book that came out like 20 years ago was, I'll have clients who have an old edition and they're like, and I'm like, put it down. Don't read it. And there's going to be a 4th edition coming out this year. I'm interested to hear if you have any inclination to read it or not, to see if it's different or if it still resonates in that way with you, that it doesn't work for you.
I would say that it's not like inherently intuitive eating. I think it's the structure and safety.
The structure and safety that's the problem.
The structure and safety. Like I'm not asking my people to be safe with their eating. I'm not asking them to have a structure. I'm not asking people to go from one, model of eating to another model of eating and all of a sudden to have freedom from food. Like that's just not what I believe, right? If we're just constantly justifying, our eating habits or like overthinking them, am I, eating too much to cope with, my emotions? Like how much is too much? Like all of it, like that's not even something I talk about. I'm like, did you eat cookies and cake? How'd they taste? Like whatever it is, like, oh, that was also what you ate? Cool. Or you didn't like that cake so much? Oh, okay. Maybe you don't eat it so much next time. Like it's based on like whatever. Like I'm just eating food, not like, was it the right way or should I overthink it? Or, oh no, intuitive eating like sets up a destination also, I find. Like once I'm recovered or like once I shed diet culture, I will be an intuitive eater. Like, therefore we are working towards something still rather than just like shedding it all and being like, okay, like now what? How do I, do this whole eating and life thing if I don't have a roadmap?
Got it. So you're feeling that the road, like it's providing too much of a direct roadmap, as you said, like it's
structure and the safety.
Structure.
Like we're not asking people to sit with the unknown. We're not asking people to sit with the ambiguity. We're not, you and I, the three of us as dietitians, like, again, I've heard people like wanting to offer something, right? Not being okay with just saying like, well, we're going to figure it out together because I'm not sure. So let's see what this looks like for you, rather than like introducing the system where if you follow this one, you will feel great.
Got it. It's interesting because as I hear you talk, I feel like the way we practice is actually probably very similar because what I've taken from intuitive eating has been just a lot of tools to help people get really uncomfortable and sit with discomfort.
I hear that a lot. And why do you have to call it something if it's the same? Right? Why do I have to label it if it's going to be the same thing? Like, can we break away from things and programs and systems and just be eating food?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Aaron,
Can we?
What do you got?
No. So I think I get meta in this moment, right? Where I'm like, well, but then isn't if we're just saying we're sitting with systems or sitting with discomfort, isn't that the system too? Because, and here's my bias before I even go forward, right? Is I'm not a certified intuitive eating counselor. But I've sat with Elise Resch, the co-author, in her supervision for a few years, and have done Evelyn Tribole's online training. So I have intuitive eating on my desk, and I talk about it a lot in sessions. And I, just like Glenys said, I feel like when I'm hearing you talk about like the system and like the sort of the framework of it, I guess to help me internalize it, I'm thinking of like helping people have some. You said safety. I would agree with that word, safety in trying to dismantle diet culture and their rigid eating. And I feel like intuitive eating yes, I think you're right. It provides a framework for how to do that. And I think for some people, and I will acknowledge that it is privileged. I will not deny that, right? I think that there is a lot of inherent privilege in intuitive eating that is not accessible to folks. And some people also need that structure, right? And I think to me, what makes us much more similar than different is that acknowledgement of like, there are many times in my office I'm like, I don't know what that was. I don't know if that was an intuitive eating moment or if that was your eating disorder, but we're going to be curious about it together. And and we might not know even as we think about it and talk about it for the whole session, but like we're going to talk about it and like look at it from all the different directions. So it's interesting because it's what I were to, if I can like sort of like think about how you're explaining some of this is like, again, is how can like, do we need another system to get rid of a system?
Yes.
And I understand that question, right? I think it's a really smart question. Are we replacing one system with another? And I think that's, I'm going to sit with that for a little bit, right? I'm going to think about that for a little bit because I don't know the answer to that. But I do know that, again, as I hear you talk about that discomfort and that gray area, I really feel like if we were to like be flies on each other's walls and listen to our conversations, I think they would sound very similar than what we think. And and the other part that I agree with you 100% is I tell people, I don't know when you are going to become an intuitive eater or if you will. Like, there's no like line in the sand that I'm going to draw that if you read the book and you do X, Y, and Z and you have some Oreos tomorrow that you're fine. Like this is not it. Like the same way I don't like the word recovered or recovery. I don't like any of them really. Cause it's like
a destination.
Unmarked. It's a destination.
It's a final
right?
destination. And we rarely arrive at destinations in our life, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if there was a question there, but that was just a statement, I guess.
Do people need structure or do we feel like we need to provide them structure with their eating? Right. I think people want structure, right? Going from feeling like they're flailing after not dieting, like, what am I doing? Like, I need structure for this. And then how much, right, do we then feel compelled to give them structure, right? Rather than being like, that's normal.
Yeah.
Like it makes sense to feel that way.
Yes. And I agree with you 100%. So, okay. So I'm going to think about this from not like, I'm going to take myself out of the room. Right. And think about, I think where I hear that, especially being problematic, right, is if I'm gonna add something to this, is like, as we use, for us to really like think about using whatever sort of how we counsel people, right, we need to be able to understand that our work, right, where we come at this needs to be like super flexible. That someone is, I agree with you, someone is who's in diet culture and to step out of it wants structure, right? And that's why, like, I don't. That's why I don't give meal plans, right? For nearly everyone, right? So like inherently, but like I'm thinking about if someone's reading intuitive eating and saying, "Oh, I got it," right? I read the book and I'm going to help someone and I'm going to start. Okay, let's open to our hymnal to page 1, right? And have you read the first chapter? What did you think of the first chapter? Okay, you're talking about and then like next week, let's go to the next chapter, right? And like that's not applying this, right? And I think the nuance to this is learning to, again, whether I don't care what model we're going to talk about here, but like I think we need to sit with the discomfort and again thinking about like where are all these systems and ideas coming from and how do we sort of filter them through the biases that show up.
Yeah, and how we need those systems as providers, right? Like if we go from
I
calories
agree.
in, calories out to like also us flailing, right? Let's, be gentle 100%. With ourselves. Like then what, right? And so I think intuitive eating totally supports us with the then what.
Yeah, and like, okay, so do you think that comfort with flailing comes with maturity and like doing this, all of the three of us, right? We're not newbies, right? We didn't just finish our internship last week. We've been doing this. We've evolved. We've all sort of done some work, right? So do you think that comes with just like in maturity of being confident in what you've learned or how you apply it or like where your education has gone to?
I like what you just said, being confident. I wasn't going to say that, but that's 100% a great aspect of it. I only became very comfortable with discomfort when working. Actually, I was at Kaiser in a specific eating disorder, therapist, dietitian meal groups. And I really got to sit and see discomfort and also be okay with it. I'm staring at it right now. I'm also seeing how hard this person is working, in their recovery. And how can I best help them? Is it going to be through adding more structure while they're trying to get away from it? Or, I will feel comfortable being able to provide indeed that roadmap, but is that what they need? And do I just need to sit with my discomfort of not knowing all the answers?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is part of the confidence of experience, right? Is like, which I'm leaning on a bit more now. It's just, I don't know the answer. Going into a session, I don't know the answer. I'm hoping that we arrive at some ideas, but I think earlier on in my life, it was like, gotta know the answer for this person. And, it's encouraging you to hear you say, like, sometimes we're just going to have to sit in discomfort with the person. Since I don't have the answer, which, I find I'm doing a lot more of now rather than that impulse to sort of provide the answer.
I think it sets up a much different dynamic also. I've been, and in the past was, the dietitian who helped their clients to learn how to, eat intuitively. And it was like this glowing halo going from diet culture to intuitive eating. And now I'm the dietitian that people love and hate, right? Now I have to sit with my discomfort. I hate that. And thank you because I can, right? Both of those things. It's the quotes that come from me now are not Jessica was so great. It was that was hard. Thanks.
Yes.
But that's where also the real growth is, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's, in our body trust stuff, we talked about being safe, being brave, not just safe, right? And that's what you're talking to me. That's what that sounds like.
It's interesting because a lot of my clients will say well, how do I know I'm an intuitive eater? I'm like, I don't really know. You may know when things feel better. And that is really where people do inform me. Yeah. They're like, you know what? I'm actually just feeling a lot better with stuff. And I don't know if I'm an intuitive eater or not. But I know that I'm not stressed out all the time and I'm not freaking out. I'm like, good enough. Maybe that's what's wrong with that. Right. And so I, much like you, I'm not doing the checkbox model where it's like, okay, did you meet all of the 10 principles of intuitive eating? And again, using that, I'm using a lot of the tools that come from that model, but also I've just learned that people need to arrive at the place that they're happy with, just as I did with my eating, where it's like, I don't know, is this intuitive eating that I'm doing? I like to just call it eating at the end.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that's what we're hoping to, you're just eating.
Right. It's
just
food.
Eating.
You're eating it. Great.
Yeah. And it's not taking up your whole day. You're giving enough attention to get yourself fed, but it's not like your life's mission. Yeah. And you don't have to become a dietitian like I did because I was so messed up with diet culture. But, and I think just people are wanting to be this perfect intuitive eater. And it's just like, that's not a thing that exists. So let's just stop calling it that. It's like you said, let's center your experience and say how are you feeling? And some people are doing stuff where it's like, well, you wouldn't call that intuitive eating. I'm like, yeah, but is that working for that person? And do they like that? That's what we have to go with.
So it creates this in and out group, right? Those who are eating intuitively are those, providers with the certification or whatever. I'm going to look for somebody with that, language versus not. Yeah. The people who are doing it the right way, because dieting was the right way, but now we're doing it the right way, which is, I always knew there was an actual right way, and that's intuitive eating.
Right. I think it speaks to the sort of religiosity of people, of humans. They want to find the religion. And I feel, and this has always been a little bit of my hang up with Health at Every Size, the way it becomes very religious for people. And that has been hard for me because I really am not, I would not call myself a religious person for the most part. And I think it's easy to get religious about things. But I think unfortunately when we do it, it's like you said, it's missing stuff.
So encouraging patients, but also dietitians to just be okay, not doing the same things that we've been doing again, because we don't do, diet stuff.
The unknown. Yeah.
So given all the conversations we've had, we've talked a lot about eating disorders, and we've talked a lot about, inherent systems that are really not inclusive, and eating disorder communities and treatment centers are have struggled with that really probably since they've been created. So can you give us your thoughts on how you would hope for or wish for eating disorder treatment to act or show up differently to be more inclusive for marginalized people?
Sure. I think there's the practical piece, and then there's the, application piece, starting with like the general assessments, the EQ, and other, assessments for eating disorders, like have inherently only been, tested, measured on thin people, right? So we're missing most of the people with restrictive eating disorders. So, looking at doing better for research and the questions asked, the scoff, is awful for me. One of them is, do you believe yourself to be fat when others say you're too thin? So many things about that. Who has the question, do you believe yourself to be fat when others say you're too thin, inherently implies that one is thin, right? So if others are going to say you're too thin, you're a thin person, right? Therefore, again, leaving out most everyone who has restrictive eating disorders. So making that a criteria for whether or not somebody has an eating disorder is inherently flawed and harmful, right? I look at body image curricula all the time, like trying to find, good ideas for body image, groups or projects. And by and large, they are awful. The CASH curriculum, I'm not sure if either of you are familiar with the CASH curriculum, but it's like a body image workbook. And I was just at a conference last year that had it, still as a useful tool. I can't remember, it's from like the early 90s. 3 of the questions they ask, it's supposed to be assumptions. So assumptions about our appearance. One's, by controlling my appearance, I can control my social and emotional health. My appearance is responsible for much of what has happened to me in my life. The only way I could ever like my looks is to change them, right? So many populations left out there. Say the only way I could ever like my looks is to change them. I feel like a lot of trans folks feel that way, right? Inherently not, disordered or eating disordered, as well as many other folks. My appearance is responsible for much of what has happened to me in my life. Anybody who experiences oppression based on anything about their body, so like race, class, size, disability, so many other things, like, yes, because our society is the way it is, it sucks. And it's true. Like, who gets to move up in this world are often the white folks. It's not the Black and brown folks that get an automatic hand up into, society or jobs, etc. Or your name, right? If your name sounds white, you get the interview. So, by controlling my appearance, I can control my social and emotional health. Also, trans folks. And also, right, this is also a size, question. By controlling my appearance, I can control my social and emotional health. Unfortunately, some people really feel that way. And depending on where they are and what their community looks like, unfortunately, their social and emotional health is improved when they're in a smaller body. And that's part of our work also, is to have the conversation, right, about whether or not it's the community and society or it's your body. Are these the narratives that are swarming around your body? That's the problem. Or is it your body? That's the problem.
Yeah.
So a lot of body image curricula, has the don't use fat talk stuff language. And it'll be like a list of things, that somebody shouldn't say. And it's like, your friend shouldn't say, oh, I'm so fat. And for a myriad of ways, again, problematic. And inherently, that body image curricula was for people who are thin, who think they're fat, right? Like this, right? So again, that's in things like the Body Project and other highly regarded body image programs that I just wish we could do better for them. Conference committees, eating disorder, orgs often have, thin white people, older people at the top making big decisions. So so many things have been done the way that they've been done for so many years because that's the way they've been done for so many years, not because it's the way that they could be and could be less harmful. So who's on your board? Do you know how to listen if you put people of color on their board? People so look for that diversity checkbox and then have no way to like conceptualize what having a person of color who has opinions and experiences that they've had that the original board has not had, like they don't know where to put that. Like, I don't know how, what you're saying is relevant. I'm just going to ignore it, or I'm going to, say something and defend my privilege or something like that. Yeah. So are you having people come in and do your, inclusion talks who are white people? I see that all the time. Right? Let's learn about inclusivity from a thin white woman. Or, right? Not. How do you set up your groups for eating disorders? Right? What conversations are you having about size in your groups? There are conversations and consultation to be had there, but there are many options. And how do you choose the one that is less harmful for everyone in the room? I think we can all be advocating for more folks of color to be providers. I think we need to hire more people of color.
Yeah.
All of us, the three of us, right? We're just like, we didn't know anything about eating disorders until we did. Right. And so often we're hiring people, who have been, working with eating disorders or, who had the, milieu counselor experience rather than hiring somebody with a different identity and then training them. So hiring them, training them, advocating for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a partial list of things that we could be doing better. I think also therapists, especially thin therapists, could be talking about bodies in the room. I always hear them talking about how they acknowledge their white privilege when they're working with a Black or brown client, right? Like these things just come up and I'm like, okay, did you talk about how they're thin, how you're thin? No.
Yeah. And that's important.
Yeah. And as someone who works in a treatment center, and my job is to actually do this work, to try to do some inclusion work around this, right? I think it's the systems in place are really deep, right? We've mentioned that before on this talk, right? And it's challenging, and I think what I keep trying to sort of reinforce is that like it's not just so much of what you just said. It's not just like let's put up a poster, right, that says all bodies are welcome or whatever, right? It's how are we gonna like really sit and listen when either a client or a staff member shares with us something about feeling marginalized, and how do we sit with that discomfort of like, ooh, shit, that was wrong. We gotta like, instead of getting defensive or things like that. And I think it's a huge challenge, but I think if we don't talk about it and if we don't think about like, how are we going to use the word fat in our community, on and on and on, these things never get done. So I'm happy to at least start to have the conversations and it's really hard. Sure. It's really, really hard, but necessary. Like we got to do hard. We have to do hard.
Well, I mean, this has been so great to talk to you, and I love being challenged a little bit in my thoughts and coming at a new, being able to learn a new way to think about something. So thank you so much for sharing everything.
Absolutely welcome. It's been lovely. I really enjoyed you both.
Oh, good. Thank you. Yeah. So tell us how people can find you.
Sure. I have a 9-to-5, so let's not contact me there, right? Let's do my private practice. I just put up a website, first and last name, Jessica Wilson, MSRD.com, because of exactly what Aaron, you were saying, like, how do we start to have these conversations? And so often, people would just be like, well, there just, aren't any resources for me to do better. Like, how do we even learn how to do this? And so I was like, well, why don't I say I can do this? And at least if you ask me and I don't know, I'll make sure to find out how. Right. So at least there is a resource for doing better. So that's a website. Instagram, trying to be more active on that one. So that's jessicawilson.msrd. But I think it's also really great if you want to be in consultation. I would love to have consultation groups for dietitians, the two of you included, though I know you're very experienced. But a consultation group about how to have hard conversations with ourselves and with our clients. So consultation group there for dietitians. If you're interested, you can go to my website, email me, and, let's connect and talk more. I'm sure I need to be challenged in many ways. So I think that's indeed how we all grow.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. And we loved talking to you. And we are looking forward to seeing everything that you do in the future.
Yes, and let's connect in person sometimes. It'd be great to meet you.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah, definitely. Hopefully at a conference at some point if I ever go to one again.
Yes. Well, I'll let you know which ones I'll be at, and then we can figure it out.
Yay.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks for coming on the show.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jessica.